Shalom to you from oneforisrael.org. In this week's Torah portion, we will be looking at Genesis 49, 8 through 12, one of the most important passages in the Torah. It's not an exaggeration to call this passage one of the most important messianic prophecies in the Hebrew Bible. Before we look specifically at our verses, I want to show you from the larger context why this is such an important passage. Though people typically think of the Torah as only a law book, a bird's eye view reveals something amazing. The Torah, like the other prophetic books in the Hebrew Bible, was written specifically to foretell the glorious future. In 4 strategically positioned passages in the Torah, we find people prophesying about the last days. At the beginning of Israel's sojourn in Egypt, Jacob says to the 12 tribes, "Gather yourselves together that I may tell you what shall happen to you in the last days." Then at the end of the wilderness wanderings, Balaam tells Balak what this people will do to your people in the last days. Finally, in Moses' closing instructions to the people of Israel before his death, he speaks about the last days twice. In Deuteronomy 4, verse 30, he says, "When you are in tribulation and all these things come upon you in the last days, you will return to the Lord your God and obey his voice." Again in chapter 31, verse 29, Moses says, "And in the last days, evil will befall you." Remarkably, in 3 of the 4 places where the Torah mentions the last days, the speaker then goes on to describe the coming of the King, Messiah. We'll discuss the other 2 end-time passages about the coming king in later studies. For now, let's look at Jacob's prophecy about a king from the tribe of Judah who will arise in the last days. Jacob says, "Judah, your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's son shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's cub. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He stooped down, he crouched as a lion, and as a lioness, who dares rouse him? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. Binding his foal to the vine, and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He has washed his garments in wine, and his vesture in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth whiter than milk." Jacob's prophecy about this future king literally becomes the talk of the town for Israel's later prophets and also the New Testament writers as well. For example, the prophet Zechariah speaks of the coming of Israel's king on a colt, the foal of a donkey, in chapter 9, verse 9. It's clear from the reference to the Messiah coming on a colt and a foal of a donkey that Zechariah's prophecy is based on Jacob's words about the Messiah binding his foal to the vine and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. And here's an interesting question to consider. Could it be that Yeshua's very first miracle, changing water into wine, is intended to be the very first installment of Jacob's prophecy about the future days of blessing? There will be such plenty in the promised land when Yeshua comes again that he will even wash his garments in wine and in the blood of grapes. Please join us next week for another installment of 5 Alive. Wishing you God's shalom from One for Israel. And don't forget to share.